All right, we are beginning our probably will be our last unit this year. Um, if time is on our side, we might be able to squeeze in one more little unit on space, but um, for this week, or actually for the next few weeks, we're going to be focusing on factors impacting the Earth and the Earth's surface. So I just want to kind of give you a heads up and kind of let you know what to expect the next few weeks. Your TEKs, there's three specific TEKs that we're going to learn. 7.8a is all about catastrophic events. So we're going to be looking at things like hurricanes and tornadoes and floods. 7.8b would be the weathering, erosion, and deposition processes and how they work together to impact what the Earth looks like. 7.8c is all about aquifers and watersheds. And so our plan is to break it down, and we're just going to do one TEK per week, starting with 7.8b. Which again states that your purpose for learning says the student is expected to analyze the effects of weathering, erosion, and deposition on the environment in the ecoregions of Texas. So basically, looking here at this map, you can see that if we were to take the state of Texas and we break it down, these are the main regions or the main areas that we have. We have like the Gulf down here, the coast. We have piney woods. This would be like where Tyler, Texas is. This is where we're located. So we have prairies, grasslands. You have hill country, which this is like down toward Austin. So if you've ever been down there, you may know why they call it hill country. We have the Panhandle, Big Bend, and then South Texas plains. So depending on where you are in Texas, every region, is affected a little differently depending on the environment, the climate, and what's happening in that particular area. And so again, since we're talking about weathering, erosion, and deposition, our focus will be just the slow changes that take place over time. Okay, a few of your key concepts that we're going to be looking at. The first one, again, the natural events of weathering, erosion, and deposition affect the unique ecoregions of Texas depending on the characteristics of the soil, the kinds of rock that's located in that area, the vegetation, meaning how much, is it a open planed area full of grass? Is there a lot of trees? Because we have learned that the more vegetation you have in an area, the more plant life you have that are rooted in the soil, your erosion process tends to slow down because the roots are acting like little anchors. They're like little fingers holding the soil in place. So the more plants you have, typically the less erosion you will have. Climate, again, depending on how much rain or how little rain it is. And then the topography of the area. And topography is one of your vocabulary words. And that's just a big fancy word for meaning like with the shape of the land and what the land looks like. So out in hill country going down toward Austin, you have those big hills that would be, and think of it as like in the terms of elevation. When you get out toward going down even further south, closer toward Mexico, you have more canyons and things like that. And then continues to say that human activities also have an effect on these. So, activities such as deforestation, urbanization can increase the impact of weathering, erosion, and deposition. So, again, if we deforest, if we cut down the trees in an area to build houses, is what this means, houses and businesses and highways, that will affect these processes. The second one states weathering is a gradual chemical or physical change. So we will look at the two types of weathering. Changes made to rocks due to the presence of weathering agents such as water, temperature, changes, and actions of plant roots and pry rocks apart. Erosion, we'll talk about what that is and the things that can cause erosion to happen. And deposition. So these are your three big ones here, okay? Again, we're focusing on what we're going to look at a little bit more in detail would be specific landforms. Okay, again, so how the Earth's topography or how the Earth's surface and what it looks like changes over time. I do want to introduce, and by the way, in this PowerPoint, as you kiddos are watching, I want you to pay attention to the words in red because those would be your vocabulary words, okay? So like the first slide here says that we have destructive forces and constructive forces that work together to help shape the land. And I'm sure you've probably heard the word destructive before. Like I'm always telling my boys, they're so destructive. I can't have anything nice because they're always tearing my stuff up. And that's what destructive means. The process of weathering and erosion are considered destructive forces because they're working together to wear away the land, okay, to tear up the land, okay. And we'll look at more examples here in a little bit. And then constructive, think like construction workers, that they build things. You can think of it like that. So constructive forces are the forces that work together to build up the land. And we have deposition that falls in that category because that's what the meaning of deposition is, that sediment gets built up over time. Okay, so let's look at these words a little bit more now in depth. Weathering, the definition of weathering simply means the process of breaking the surface down into smaller pieces. And those little pieces that rock is broken down to, we call it sediment, okay? Some agents or some things that cause the rocks to get weathered or that cause the rocks to be broken would be wind, rain, ice, plants, animals, and flowing water. And I do want to let you know that tomorrow or, the next activity that I'm assigning for you is going to be an ed puzzle where you're going to watch another little video and you'll get some more specific examples on this particular concept. So the two kinds of weathering, we have physical and chemical. And physical, by the way, a synonym for physical that you may see will be mechanical weathering. And those two are the same. Okay, that means that the rock is just physically being broken into smaller pieces. Ice being one of those. So when the water gets into the crack of the rock and then when it freezes, you got to remember when water freezes, it expands, which means it gets bigger. So over time of that happening, it would cause the rock to crack and to break into smaller pieces. Okay. The other kind of weathering is chemical weathering. And chemical, if you go back to 6th grade and think about what you learned in 6th grade about chemical reactions, meaning that it changes what the substance is altogether. Okay. So in a chemical weathering, your rock is being broken down, but it's chemically being altered. So it's going to change of what kind of rock it is. Okay. Here's some real life examples. Over here, the Statue of Liberty, this would be an example of chemical weathering because I don't know if you know this or not, but when we first got the Statue of Liberty, way back in 1886, she was copper. Okay, this is what she looked like. Oop. And being out there on the coast and exposed to the ocean water and the salt in the water and the pollution in the air, she has changed and now she's green, and that's not what she looked like at first. Okay, so this is an example of chemical weathering, and again, this is a good physical example of physical weathering, so just the rock being physically broken into smaller pieces. Now, the next process we're going to talk about is erosion. So erosion is the process of sediment or the process of little bits of rock and sand being carried away. So it's going to move, okay? Things that can cause your rock and sand and dirt and sediments move would be wind, again, moving water. So it can be like simple rainwater, okay? When it rains and you get a flash flood, because we get those a lot here in Texas. It can be a river, ocean waves, all of those examples of moving water can cause erosion to happen. Gravity. So if you're thinking about like a steep hillside, okay, over time of gravity, the force of gravity working on rocks, and if there's frost wedging that takes place or things like that where the rock is broken, gravity will take over and pull that rock down. Landslides, rock slides, things like that. And then, of course, animals. And remember, humans are classified as animals because whether if you're talking about a fox who goes out and burrows into the ground or a human who goes and digs into the ground, either way, we are causing that rock to get broken up and moved away. Okay. This down here is an arch. So this would be like an example of wind erosion because you'll see in the next few days as you're working on these assignments that the wind will pick up the sediment, pick up the rock, the dirt, and as it's blowing, it'll slowly chip away at the rock, okay? A lot like sandpaper. This is how a cave forms. So again, this would be the process of a weathering erosion working together to form a cave. This is actually a picture of the Grand Canyon. So this, if you watch this GIF down here, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry. And if you'll pay attention to the, is it not going to play for me now? All right. I had a little GIF down here that was supposed to show you as the water flows over the surface, it would slowly carve out this canyon. So that's exactly how the Grand Canyon was formed. Okay, mountains, different landform, but mountains are created through plate tectonics. So when you learn that in the sixth grade about think about the I think you guys did an activity with graham crackers or something where you push the frosting together. Okay, so when those plates shift and move and they collide, they push up, and you get a mountain. Okay, but then the processes of weathering and erosion come over and take place, and so if you look at a mountain and if it looks like this, if it's a pointy mountain with a nice point, you know that it's a relatively young mountain. It has not been exposed to wind or rain or ice or anything, so it's still pretty pointy. Over time, that mountain will be worn down and you'll see that they'll start to be rounded on the top. That's how you know it's an old mountain because it has been exposed to weathering and erosion. Okay. Real quick, let's talk about valleys and canyons. So like the Grand Canyon again, created through the process of weathering and erosion. So moving water such as a river or flash flooding. The Grand Canyon itself was carved out by the Colorado River. So fun fact for you. Let's look at a picture of a little bit more about cave formation. We, as I stated earlier, is created from the processes of weathering and erosion. So again, remember they're destructive forces that are working together. Okay. Typically, what happens is rainwater will seep into the cracks, the surface of the earth, and the chemicals will come in there. This will be a good example of chemical weathering, and it wears away and it eats away at the rocks, and then you're left with the opening, the hole in the ground, which we call the cave. Okay. Then you have the last process, the deposition, which again is the building up or the dropping off of sediment into a new place. So check out this GIF. You can see like this would be a desert area, obviously, but as the wind is blowing and it's carrying the dirt with it, okay. Eventually, what goes up must come down, kind of thing. So whatever's moving eventually is going to come to a new resting place. So wherever, like if the wind is blowing and it's carrying the sediment, when the wind stops blowing, it's going to drop the sediment wherever it is, and then you'll get a buildup over time. So that's how we get like sand dunes. Okay, this is a picture of a delta, and you'll get some more information on that a little bit later. But see all this sediment that's being deposited out here. You can see that there's a river flowing. This is what and as the river dumps into this larger body of water, it's depositing all that dirt, and so over time you'll get what we call a delta, and this is what it looks like up close. Okay, full of sediment. These are actually really, really unique places. Think of it like an estuary. Okay, remember in the last little bit that we learned estuaries are full of life because it's a combination of salt water and fresh water. Same thing here. So you have a river dumping into an ocean. So this would be a good, like an estuary. Very, very fertile. Good place for plants to thrive and grow. Okay. Again, a delta is created by a river that slows down as it reaches the bigger body of water, and therefore that sediment gets dropped off. Okay. And the last little landforms I think we're going to talk about real quick are islands. And islands are created in various ways. A good one, like this is a nice little pretty Hawaiian island, but some are created from the destructive forces of weathering and erosion, and others are actually created from deposition. So let's take a look. Here's a good example of an island out toward Hawaii. And what happens, and I'm sure you remember this from elementary, is that when a volcano erupts, all the lava spews out and it comes and eventually, it'll come into the water, and then it's going to start to slowly cool off and it's going to harden and it's going to form igneous rock. That is one way you get an island. So this would actually be an island that's created from the deposition process because this land is getting bigger. Okay. It's going to, as the lava comes out and adds on, you'll get bigger and bigger. Okay. So that would be deposition there. Some other islands are actually created from like beach erosion. So like out here, you can see this is up toward Long Island. So as the ocean waves are coming up and crashing on the shore and beating the shore, okay, it's going to slowly chop those islands up. And that's how we get, long time ago, this was one bigger island, and then now you can start to see that it's being chopped up into many little pieces, and that's one way that we do get islands. Okay. So we're going to wrap up this lesson now, and just remember that your objective was to basically analyze the effects. You got to remember what weathering, erosion, and deposition are. Weathering and erosion are destructive forces because they work together to wear away the land. Remember, weathering is the actual breaking of the soil, of the rock into sediment. Erosion is the carrying away of that sediment, while deposition means that the sediment gets dropped off or deposited in a new location. As we talked about those regions at the beginning of this lesson, keep in mind that the big factor of these processes is where they take place. So again, if you're on the coastal region, you're obviously going to have more beach erosion down here than versus if you're up here in the Panhandle, which is a plains area where you typically probably have more wind erosion. Up here in the Panhandle, where they tend to have a lot more ice. So they'll have a lot more frost action going on that will, slowly break their rocks down. So again, it depends on where you are in the state of Texas and how this land is affected. All right, well, that wraps up today's lesson. Quick recap review on weathering, erosion, and deposition, those three processes that slowly wear away and shape the face of Texas and the shape of land in general. And then your next activity will be your Ed puzzle. And then the last activity that we're going to work on this week is we're going to be working on STEM scopes again. So we'll have a little reading and assessing to see if you understood these processes. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.